Today, we're going to be talking about 8 tips for wide receivers to dominate in 2024. So the first tip is going to be keeping an explosive pad level off the line of scrimmage when facing a physical DB. So this is a common question that we get asked is, Coach, how can I beat physical DBs who are on the line of scrimmage, maybe a little bit bigger than me, trying to get hands and jam when I have to work a press release and get up into my route? And the first thing I always tell receivers is to focus on their pad level. So you see this wide receiver, he's not the biggest guy in the world, right? He's going up against a linebacker, maybe like a strong safety, bigger guy, physical guy, and he's trying to get hands. So when he comes off the line, he's working this release called a split release, and we're going to talk more about this release as this video goes on. But notice how he doesn't expose his chest. He's got this slight forward lean. It's almost like I tell my wide receivers, pretend you are underneath a small doorway. So when you do this release and you have this slight forward lean with your pad level, you have a strong base, you have like a slight lean forward with your entire body, that's a more balanced and more explosive position. So if this dude does get hands on us, we're not screwed. We could swat the hands, we have some forward momentum, and I could go get up into my route. So the first coaching tip that I could tell you guys, fellas, is pretend that you are underneath a small doorway whenever working a press release against a physical guy. So let's play this full speed one more time. This is a great example of good pad level, avoiding the jam, and getting up into the route. If you stand straight up in the air and you pop your chest up, pop your chin up, you're going to get jammed back, rerouted, and the timing of the play will be off. Now, the second tip for wide receivers in 2024 is take what the DB gives you. So what do I mean by that? I mean, when he is lined up outside shade and you have to run an outside breaking route, or vice versa, if he's inside shade and you have to run an inside breaking route, do not force the release to his leverage. So before we explain this, you guys, if you're a wide receiver and you would like to train with us this offseason in 2024, we are going to be coming out to 13 more states and cities across the U.S. for 2-day-long QB and wide receiver training camps. Next up on our camp tour, we'll be coming out to Las Vegas, Nevada, and Charlotte, North Carolina. Both of those camps are completely sold out, though, fellas, but we will have 10 more opportunities for you to train with us in Portland, Dallas, Nashville, Chicago, Buffalo, Atlanta, Houston, Philly, Detroit, Boise, and Los Angeles. So guys, if you want some more information, we're coming to a city near you, you'd like to sign up and train with me and my staff of coaches, check out that very first link in the description below. That very first link will give you all the information, how you can sign up, and what we will be covering. So again, very first link in that description below. Let's get back to this video. So second tip, like I said, take what the DB gives you. So let's play this right from Chris Olave and talk about what I mean. So a common mistake that a lot of receivers think is that, oh, if I have an outside breaking route, I must take an outside release. Or I have an inside breaking route, I must take an inside release. That's not the case unless it is designed that way. There are some plays that are called MORs, and usually that is on like a fade route, where that means mandatory outside release, where sometimes you do have to force it. That's not the situation I'm talking about. I'm talking about routes like 10-yard outs, like corners. Sometimes fades if it's not an MOR, but let's focus on a 10-yard out. So DB's outside shade for a reason. When we come up to the line of scrimmage, we have to have a plan. Your plan of action is determined based on how this DB is playing you. So we're looking at his leverage, and then we are looking at the distance he has from me. So when this DB is lined up outside leverage, which means the middle of his body is like even with my outside shoulder, that means he does not want me to go to the outside. His coverage like technique, his coverage coaching tips, do not give up the outside release. Force everything to the inside because he has some kind of safety help to the inside. So as a receiver, if I try to just give him a quick move inside and then go, he's not going to bite. That is his leverage responsibility. So he's going to force me to the sideline, and I'm not going to have any room to run. So, or room for the quarterback to throw me open. So what Olave does here is he attacks this DB's leverage. The best way to get this DB to freeze his feet, best way to get him to move, is make him think we are going where he doesn't want us to go. So he gives this little like simple, just like little 1, 2, 3 release, crossover release, and takes the inside release. Now this is where everybody freaks out at the receiver position, because Olave does a great job of restacking. Restacking essentially means on a press release, when you run a route and you get this DB to be directly behind you, trailing your back hip, if you will. So when you have him trailing your back hip, you have a two-way go. You could give him a fake outside and cut in. You give him a fake inside like Olave does, and then cut out and have all of this room. Now, people panic though, because again, the whole reason we want to take the inside release is so at the break point, the quarterback has plenty of space to lead me. And that's super important on outside breaking routes. And when you have an inside breaking route versus inside shade press, you take the outside release so you have room for the QB as well, but so the spacing of the play is correct. Usually when you have an inside breaking route, you'll have a slot receiver also running something to the inside, maybe he's going vertical, maybe he's going out, and if you get forced way inside, the spacing of the play is off. So it's all about spacing and giving your quarterback room. Now, people panic right here because if they can't restack and this DB's right on their hip, what can you do? They're not going to try to run around him because then you're going to get knocked off the route. DB's going to be right on. DB's still going to have outside leverage, and that quarterback's not going to throw you the ball. So a lot of receivers are afraid to use something called a throw-by move. If I got a DB right here, I could get physical at the top of the route. I could use my outside arm and put it on the back of his shoulder, back of his hip, swat and slip under him. The quarterback would rather have a slower break by like half a second, maybe obviously less than that, and have room to fade you or room to throw you open than you trying to run way around him and have the spacing and the timing all screwed up. So fellas, you have to be able to react to the top and make sure we take what DBs give us. So let's play this full speed one more time. Great job with that inside release. Great job giving a move and then giving that quarterback room on that out route. Now, that's not always how it's going to go. So this brings me to my third tip for wide receivers in 2024, and that is being able to react with your press releases. So we're going to be looking at a post route here from CeeDee Lamb, and he's going to be facing a DB who is inside shade now. And remember, inside shade means he has inside leverage. At least that's so it seems pre-snap. He's got inside leverage. He doesn't want to give up the inside release. He wants to force everything to the outside, which is where his help is, and his help is the sideline. Because if I'm running out of bounds or running like a step from the out of bounds line, that's an impossible throw for the QB, pretty much impossible throw. So he wants to force me there. He's not going to give up the inside release. So ideally, as a receiver, my plan of action off the line, remember, it comes from the DB's leverage and the distance. So he's about 1.5 yards away from me inside shade. My plan is going to be, I'm going to attack him, try to make him think I'm going inside so he keeps his leverage, take what the DB gives me, and then I'm going to work to try to stack or at the break point, maybe slip under him and throw by. That's how quick your thought process has to be off the line. The release you use, there's a million different releases you can use, but conceptually, that's what you want to do. But watch what happens here with Lamb. He attacks him, but the DB just kind of holds. He doesn't keep his leverage. You can react and just take what he gives you, guys. You don't have to commit to a release, and if the DB does something opposite of what you think, you don't have to just roll with it and get the play timing pretty much screwed up, right? So Lamb comes off the ball, he attacks him, right? When he attacks him, this DB doesn't really hold his leverage. He kind of like stays square, he almost inches back, giving Lamb the inside release now. So as a receiver, we have to be able to react. If Lamb's thought process was, okay, I'm going to attack him and then I'm just going to go to the outside, right? But if that DB maybe jumps outside or holds head up and I force that outside release, he's probably going to get hands and squeeze me to the sideline like we don't want to happen. If I attack him and he does something different, like stay there, just take it. And if you just take it, that's a perfect example of a reactionary release. So the third tip for wide receivers in 2024, make sure you're able to react off the line. This is no different than like, let's go back. Let's say I got a DB who's like outside shade and press. And let's say I want to go attack him and then take the inside release and run an out route, right? But let's say this DB's outside shade, I go attack him and then he jumps to the inside. Just take it and go. You have to be able to react. That's why it's so important for wide receivers to work different reactionary drills when they are training. So let's play this full speed. Great job by Lamb taking what the DB gives him and then getting up into this post route. Now, the fourth tip for wide receivers in 2024 is going to be creative with your routes. Now, on every single route, what you want to try to make this DB think you're doing is a fade, right? Whether it's a 5-yard hitch, whether it's a 15-yard curl, whether it's a deep post, all the way up to that break point. You want to make the DB think you're going deep. Now, there's 3 things that you could do for that. Your speed, you run with long strides. You don't take short, choppy strides right before you break, and you got to have a good body language position, aka pad level. But there's another way that you could sell vertical, and that's with creativity, and that's what we're going to talk about here with Tyreek Hill. So Tyreek Hill is using a move called a vertical set. The reason why this is such a great move is this makes the route look exactly like how he would run a fade versus this type of coverage. So let's talk about it, right? So if I got a DB who's lined up outside shade and in zone, if he's in zone, outside shade, he is trying to prevent anything deep, and he is trying to not let anybody get to the outside, right? Because that's why his leverage is outside. Protect the outside. And notice how this isn't press man like the last examples, but his leverage responsibilities stay the same. So he's taught, don't get beat deep, don't get beat to the outside. Force everything to the inside. So if you had to run a fade route versus this type of coverage, how would you run it? You wouldn't just try to run around him because he would squeeze you to the sideline. And usually on a fade versus zone, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to attack and take the inside release. Tyreek Hill might be able to because he's fast as hell, but not everybody's that fast. So how you would run this fade route is you would use a move called a vertical set. You would run at him, you would close the space, you'd attack his near hip, aka his hip closest to you, or you could think of it like you're trying to step on his toes. But when you're running at him, you would give him a hard fake to the inside. This is called a vertical set. So that vertical set makes this DB maybe think it's a post, it's an inside breaking route, maybe he hesitates for a sec, and then you could slip behind him. And the whole reason you want to close the space with him is when you throw this vertical set, you can go hip to hip with him. You could get right past him, hip to hip, so you have room, even if he's stride for stride with us, for the quarterback to fade me. That's why we can't just run around him. Now, like I said, you could use this to your advantage on other routes, and that's what Tyreek Hill does. He closes the space, he runs at him, gives this vertical set. What does this look like now? He's working to this blind spot. DB thinks it's a fade. He almost wants to turn out of there. Then Tyreek Hill puts the brakes on, and you see he's got 5 or more yards of separation. That is insane. Now, does it help that he's fast? Absolutely. Do I think any wide receiver can use this, though? Absolutely. I think any wide receiver could do this type of move. Now, Tyreek Hill adds a little extra, sauce to it because he does it right on the next step. Like, he gives this vertical set and then breaks right away. Normally, what receivers will do on this is they will give this vertical set about right here and then take around 3 steps towards the blind spot or however long the route is. So you don't have to do it right away. You could do it and then work to the blind spot for maybe 2 to 3 steps depending on the route, right? But that's a great way to be creative with your route. So that's why I want to discuss this for wide receivers. You got to be creative, right? If you're just constant game plans, I'm just going to run hard over and over again, a DB will eventually be able to get that down. So let's play this thing full speed. Great example of that vertical set from Hill, and then putting the brakes on to come back to the ball. So now, next tip for wide receivers in 2024 is going to be selling routes with not just their shoulders, not just their head, but with their entire upper body, more specifically your hips. So let's play this thing full speed, then we'll break it down. So Justin Jefferson's going to be using a move at the top called a rocker step, right? So I'm sure a lot of you have heard of a rocker step. A rocker step is a move where it's like a 1-2 at the top of the break. So it's like a crossover, if you will, and you want to step in the direction you're going. So if I'm running a post, I want to step with my inside foot first and then fake with my outside foot. So right before this break point, you see how he gives his inside hard step. That's the first part of the rocker step. Then he sells to the outside. Now I want you to pay attention to his body, right? A lot of wide receivers get this false advice, I guess you could say, of, oh, you want to give him a head and shoulder fake. A DB is not supposed to be watching your head and shoulders. A DB is supposed to be watching what? He's supposed to be keyed in on my hips because their thought process is, oh, the wide receiver's hips will tell you where he is going. But you almost want to reverse engineer that as a receiver, and you want to sell the route with your hips. Now, how can you do that? So you see when Jefferson decides to make this move here, I want you to pay attention to where his belly button is facing. I know it seems weird to think about, but I have a point with this. You see how his hips and his belly button almost turns towards the sideline. That's what's going to get a DB to bite. Because when he's watching your hips and you can turn your hips, that's what's going to sell the move more. Now, notice how when he does this, this is the mistake that a lot of receivers make when they try to sell with their hips. Notice how when he does this, where do his toes stay? Forward. He keeps almost a 45-degree shin angle. I'm not necessarily saying that you have to get that 45-degree shin angle, but you don't want your toes to be pointed on this to the sideline or on a 45-degree angle like this when you're trying to sell, because then you will not be able to push and drive out of the cut. If you can keep your toes forward, keep this positive shin angle, but turn that belly button at the same time, separating, they call it upper body and lower body dissociation, which essentially means separation. You want to separate your upper body from your lower body. So if you can turn your hips, you could turn your entire body. That's a way to sell, but still be in an explosive position. So that's what I would like all wide receivers to be able to accomplish off the line of scrimmage when throwing a move and at the top of the route. Turn your belly button to the sideline and be loose with your upper body to sell your cuts. Let's play this thing again, full speed one more time. Great job here from Jefferson using this rocker step to be able to get separation. All right, so this next tip here for wide receivers in 2024 is use releases where you can react off of a DB when he is in head-up press. So what do I mean by that? So remember we talked about DBs when they're inside shade, DBs when they're outside shade. A DB who's outside shade, his goal is don't let you go outside. A DB who's inside shade, don't let you go inside. So we have to take what he gives me. But what if I see a DB who's lined up right in front of me? Head up leverage, as I call it, or head up shade, if you will. How can you beat that? And that comes from using releases that put you in a position to where you can react. And a split release is a great release for that. So this is a release that I feel all wide receivers, I don't care what level it is, should have in their tool belt because it helps you react and release either way. You could release outside or inside because you're in a position of balance on this split release. So let me play it full speed and then we'll break it down. So Garrett Wilson's going to be using this release. He splits, DB jumps outside, bam, take take the inside release, throw by move at the top, just like what we were talking about with that example of Olave, but now he didn't stack him. This is everybody's biggest nightmare, and this is a perfect example from Garrett Wilson. So let's talk about it. So again, a split release is pretty much exactly how it sounds. You are splitting your feet, but a lot of people do this wrong. A lot of people don't have it. Both feet make contact with the ground. A lot of people are too wide, and a lot of people are too narrow, which throws off the release. So let's talk about this. So you essentially want to take your front foot, the foot that is up, and move it out, and take your back foot and move it straight up. A lot of people will split both feet and step out with both feet. That's not the case. That's not what you want to do on this, because you're going to be too wide and you're not going to be in an explosive spot. Move your front foot out and your back foot up. So let's watch what he does here. So front foot goes out, back foot comes up. Both feet are making contact with the ground at the exact same time. This is the position of balance, and this is how you can react off of the DB. Because when that DB's head up, he's got one of three options. You do this split release, and he could jump to the outside because that's the leverage that he is trying to protect. He's trying to disguise it being head up. Okay, fine. I hit this split release, and because both feet are balanced, I could release either way. When both feet make contact with the ground, you're on that middle arch of your foot. You keep a slight forward lean with your pad level, like the very first thing we talked about in this video. Keeping that slight forward lean so you're in a balanced, explosive position. That DB jumps, okay, fine. I could just push, and I could just react and take the inside release. Let's say because he's head up, we do this split release, and this DB jumps to the inside. What can we do? Push off of the inside foot, take the outside release. That's why the split release is so great. You could release either way and you could react. Now, I'm making this sound very, very easy. This is something that you need to rep out. I recommend doing this like with a partner. Like if you got a receiver that you like to train with, or your receiver coach, or your receiver coach listening to this, I have my wide receivers do this release, and then I give a DB in front of them and I have them react. But we have to rep it over and over again so you get comfortable with the reaction. Now, the one last option this DB could have is he just stays there. So if I have to run an out route, I do this split release and he just stays. Obviously, on an outside breaking route, we'd prefer an outside release. We don't have to take an outside release always, but we'd prefer it. So if he just sits there head up, I'd give him a little fake inside and then take the outside release and go. That's why this split release is so lethal, and that's why I think every wide receiver needs to have it in their tool belt. So let's play this again, full speed one more time. And again, this is a great example of that throw-by move that we were talking about when you take an inside release on an outside breaking route. So now, next tip for wide receivers in 2024 is have violent hips. So what do I mean by that? So on routes like comebacks, routes like curls, routes like hitches, routes like the stop route where you just got to put the brakes on and stop yourself, or decelerate and come out of it at like a 45-degree angle, you have to change your center of gravity to be able to throttle down. What do I mean by that? Let's play full speed. So this is an example here from Evan Stewart running a comeback route, and you see how quickly he's able to get in and out of the break. Guys, like we talked about, what am I trying to make the DB think I'm doing on every route? I'm running a fade, right? We're trying to make him think we are going deep. So going into a break point to make him think that, I got to run hard. I got to make sure I have long strides. Got to have good body language. All that stuff we talked about in that Tyreek Hill clip. So when you're moving with that kind of speed, if you guys don't drop your hips quickly like so, and they call this snapping down with your body language, you're not going to be able to stop. So many wide receiver coaches have taught receivers the old like, hey, you want to like sink your hips, right? I hate that connotation of that word, because sinking your hips implies that it's a little bit slower in my eyes, right? I want a drop of your hips. I want somebody like you got a string attached to your chin and somebody is pulling the string down, and that pull down, that string going straight to your knee, is what changes that center of gravity. The faster you get to that low spot, the faster you're going to get out of the break. We should never sink my hips. We should never chatter my feet and beat the drum with my hands. Now, a lot of people will say, well, coach, I'm hesitant on doing that because I feel like I'm going to hurt my knee. I feel like I could hurt my ankle. Maybe my legs aren't strong enough to do this. And absolutely, that's the case. I say this very matter-of-factly, but there are tons of drills that you need to do to work on this. There are tons of exercises in the gym that you need to do to strengthen your single leg, to strengthen your ankles, to make sure you have stable knees, stable ankles. All of those things you have to do. And we have tons of drills on this channel for that. If you check out this channel and go through past videos, our YouTube shorts, and we have tons of content on our website for that to build this skill. But this is something that you ultimately want to shoot for. So remember, when you guys are trying to decelerate, drop to that 90-degree position with your base as quickly as possible. I tell my receivers, bring your chest to your quads and sit into a chair. If you sit into a 90-degree chair and you bring your chest to your quad, you're going to be able to decelerate. Now it's just all about how fast can we do that. So that's how you guys can slow down when running full speed. Have that mindset of I am snapping down, I am dropping violently, not sinking my hips. So now, Next example or next tip for wide receivers in 2024 to get better is get comfortable making DBs miss laterally. So this is usually for shorter wide receivers who are going up against bigger physical DBs, right? So this is not a situation where the DB is going to jam. You obviously want to keep a good pad level. But if this DB, and we let's say he's right up on the line, I don't have much room to work. If I got a DB who's in press, who's maybe 2 yards away, and let's say I got to go run a fade route, which is what Tyreek Hill runs. For that 2 yards of space right there, I want to close the distance, right? He's 2 yards away. I want to go attack him for 2 yards and then give him a move and then go, right? But if that DB's walked down and I don't have any room to make, I don't need to close the space. A lot of wide receivers won't do themselves any favors, and they'll run at a DB just causing the hand contact. They'll run into him, hand contact right off the bat because they're running into him. We have to get comfortable making a DB miss laterally. So let's talk about what that means. So this is a great example of Tyreek Hill making somebody miss lateral. He's not taking a vertical step. All we need is just that DB to be off platform for a subtle second. So let's watch this play. Let's break this thing down. So DB is not giving him any space. Tyreek Hill, you see how he steps more this way, almost like towards his offensive line. But when he does that, he is stepping outside of this DB's frame. Anytime we have a physical DB, I like to think of it like you're driving. Like you have 3 driving lanes. You have the left lane, you got the middle lane, which is where the DB can be, and then the right lane. If I'm trying to get this DB to move to the left lane, I got to step to the left lane outside of his frame. Now, something that a lot of wide receivers will do is they'll try to make this DB miss laterally, but their feet will be really, really wide and their body will not move. Something I tell my receivers to do is bring your head with your knee. Your head should be even with your knee when you throw this cut, because not only will that help you sell with your upper body, but that allows you to step outside his frame and sell the movement, but be in an explosive position to drive out of that thing. So get comfortable making DBs miss lateral. If they're off, like let's say this guy was off maybe another half a yard, Tyreek Hill could do this same release, but this step would be more vertical to close the space. Because if this DB's off by a yard and we step lateral, and let's say we get him to jump for a sec, I still got to get to here. And if there's this gap of space and I take off and go, that DB could cut off my angle and get hands on me. That's why it's so important to close the space, because now, since we're making him miss lateral, what can we do? We could get right past his hip. He can't cut off the angle because we're already close. You want to make this DB uncomfortable by being close, and you want to make him miss while you're close, so it's easier for us to stack or easiest for us to get separation. So making a DB miss lateral is one of the most important tips that wide receivers can understand versus press coverage. Okay, so now next tip for wide receivers in 2024 is how you can avoid knee injuries by letting your feet drive you out of the break. This is a big one, and I don't think enough people talk about this in the receiver space. Don't think enough people talk about this in just the athletic training space, for example. This is an example of Jameson Williams here tearing his ACL, because he is trying to simply just get out of the break. This is Mechie, my apologies. But this is him just trying to get out of the break simply too quick with his upper body before the feet get down. So one of the main things that I recommend for all wide receivers is you never want to cut outside of your body frame. So what do I mean by being outside of the body frame? I mean that's being outside of your shoulders. So when he goes to cut here, he's obviously dropping his hips, right? Remember, we talked about that in that example of Evan Stewart on that comeback. You got to be violent. You got to drop your hips. And like I said, a lot of people are hesitant about injuries. Usually improper form is what leads to injuries more so than guys just being hesitant with the move, right? So he breaks down and he's probably trying to get his head around to try to find the ball, right? But when you guys are cutting and your body is leaving and your head, your shoulders, your hips are all trying to get out of the break and your foot is still planting and you are moving at a high speed, when that foot lands outside your frame, guess what it's going to hit first? The heel is going to hit first. Your leg can hyperextend and that puts that pressure on the knee and sometimes the Achilles, the ankle, all because of improper form. So what could he have done here, right? I think he just needs to get more comfortable. And again, it's hard to think about in the moment. I'm just saying this from your guys' perspective as a high school, youth, college receiver. Like, this is how you should think about it when you're training and making this type of break. When you cut, let your feet drive you out. You want to cut first, then turn. You break down. This foot should plant now, and he should be driving off of that foot to snap his head around and to get his hips out of there. But because he tried to get out too quick with his upper body, that's what caused that to be outside the frame, and that is ultimately what puts pressure on the knee. So fellas, when we're breaking down, like let's say I'm running like a comeback route, like that Stewart example. Let's say you snap down with your left foot. Let's say it's your inside foot. You break with your left foot. When you plant with the right foot, turn with the left foot to try to get out, both of those cuts need to be powerful. They need to be inside your frame. And this 3rd to 5th step has to push you out to snap your head around. You may feel like you're not seeing the ball as fast, but with repetition and doing it over time, you could cut safely and still be able to locate the ball just as well. So fellas, that's one of the most important things that I feel receivers can do. Make sure that you guys are not getting out of the break with your upper body before the feet get down.